My name is Lori Chu, and I will be reviewing a book by Susan Scott called Fierce Conversations Achieving Success at Work and in Life, One Conversation at a Time. This is absolutely a must read, and I'd like to start by talking about one of the quotes that very much resonated with me personally when I have been trying to make decisions about conversations when I think back on them. What price am I willing to pay to be here? And this can go both ways. Am I willing to pay the price of being silent and accepting the problem? Or am I willing to pay the price and have the courage to actually tackle the problem? And that is the stance that Scott takes in her book. She bases her book on 7 different principles. The first one she addresses is having the courage to challenge reality. And one of the things she points out is that it really does matter. The things that you're tackling, the reality that you're trying to challenge, it really does matter that you challenge that. She talks about also having a balance, not having one single undeniable truth that you can't bend or negotiate on. But she addresses several big questions that really get you to thinking. This is very thought-provoking. She asks readers to address, where am I going? Why am I going there? Who's going with me? How am I going to get there? Am I realizing my full potential? Am I fully extended in my capabilities? Is there value and fulfillment in my work today? And then, what unmet needs am I moved and positioned to meet? Her second principle is to make the conversation real. And in this, she talks about knowing yourself first. And she actually points back to the big questions, but she adds one, the one that most resonated with me. What price am I willing to pay to be here? Some things are hard to talk about, and she addresses that. But she points out that not addressing the problem doesn't do anything to actually solve the problem. So this problem exists whether you talk about it or not. Then the third principle is be present for the discussion. And she talks about the difference between, I love the example she gives here, the difference between holding a marriage license and actually being truly committed to someone. And just talking about, putting away your cell phones, putting aside all of the other things that are going on in your mind to really be present for a conversation and address whatever issues are there. Then number 4, tackle your toughest problem now. One of the biggest quotes, another really big quote to me was, and I wish I'd had it when I was writing my chapter, but burnout happens not because we're trying to solve problems, but because we've been trying to solve the same problem over and over. In other words, you get what you tolerate. And one of the other things that she points out is that this tough problem, dealing with the tough problems now, it can't be dependent on how others are going to react. Then, principle number 5, obey your gut instincts. Sometimes, she points out, it boils down to deciding, is this right or is it wrong? The way we will go in a conversation has everything to do with the way we leave a conversation. So if we're not present for the conversation when we go in, it's not likely we're going to be present for the conversation when we come out. She also talks about reflecting on past conversations. What do you think, what have you thought about in conversations that you've had in the past that you've not said? And then she also says, if you ignore your gut long enough, you're going to eventually become numb to that gut instinct and not really even receive it anymore. So listen to your gut. Then number 6, take responsibility for your emotional wake. She gave an excellent example here. She talked about when uh, boats are in and around a dock, and one rude boater comes through, and creates this huge wake and knocks boats up against the dock, it isn't the driver of the boat that came through making the big wake that has to pay the price for the damage. It is the owners of the other boat. And so her point in that was, am I saying this clearly? How do I want to be remembered in this conversation? And learning to deliver your message effectively without being rude, without causing someone else to be hurt. Still get your point across, but do it in a way that is reasonable. And then her seventh principle was, let silence do the heavy lifting. Now, when I first looked at this, I thought I was going to have a pushback, because she spends her whole book talking about how to have the conversation, and then she ends it with the silence, which is something that I struggle with. I often avoid talking to problems and remain silent. So I thought that's where she was going here, but it's not. What her point was in this is, talk with people and not at them or to them. In other words, it shouldn't be a performance. She addresses the need for silence in the regard for this silent time should be a thinking time. She points out that we all get nervous when we are dealing with silence, but having that silence does give you a moment to think about what you need to say, especially when it's an emotional topic. Not all silence is healthy, and she kind of ends right there, especially when you're talking about becoming passive or passive aggressive, and she even hits home with relationships where you use silence as a punishment. And that very much hits home to me, because a lot of times I tend to remain silent when I should speak. But she ends the book with some encouragement for her readers. She says to tell the truth, but be okay with knowing that not everyone is going to be okay. And she also has a few final questions. What is real? What is honest? What is quality? And what has value? And those should be your driving forces in the conversations that you have. Connections to other books. I think this pairs well with Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, especially when he talks about conflict or fear of conflict. Obviously, the paired book, Overcoming the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I also thought it paired well with Alan Deutschman's Change or Die, talking about, especially when he talks about how Delancey Street challenged the norm, and they had to have some deep, tough conversations to get that going. Then finally, my star moments, and these were big to me. All of them were big. No matter how logical we claim to be, our emotions are the most powerful factor in how we respond and interact with others. This is not a girl thing. It is not a cultural thing. This is a human condition, and the implications are significant and costly if we don't get this right. Nothing is more dangerous than an idea when it's the only one you have. Some things are difficult to talk about because the fix won't be easy. But as I've said before, if a problem exists, it exists whether we talk about it or not. And this one is probably another one of my biggest resonating quotes. This means that I cannot come out from behind myself into conversations with others and make them real until I know who I am and what I intend to do with my life. Each of us must first answer the question, where am I going, before we can address the question, who is going with me? Again, back to the burnout quote. Burnout happens not because we're trying to solve problems, but because we're trying to solve the same problem over and over again. And fierce conversations cannot be dependent on how others respond. Then finally, this is the one about taking responsibility for your wake. Learn to deliver the message without the load. Thank you for watching.